Welcome to Motivation Local, a podcast where we discuss how place impacts identity. All of this made possible with support from TELUS Story Hive. Lived experience not only shapes how people view a community, but also how they view themselves. The sum of these experiences and memories form a narrative about a community. It's at the intersection of this that we seek to explore how these experiences and memories shape individuals. How has their community motivated them? And perhaps how have they motivated their community? I'm Corey Sadlemyer, host of Motivation Local. Our focus this season will be my hometown, Medicine Hat, Alberta. Through a collection of stories, our goal will be to generate an informative sketch about Medicine Hat through the eyes of a small sample of its members. Some of our guests will be born and raised here, some will be former residents that have ventured off to new places, and some will be people who have come to call Medicine Hat home. Each will provide their own reflections on place and identity. Our hope is that this provides you with time to reflect on your hometown, wherever you live. In a story about place, I would be remiss to not acknowledge the land that inspires this show. This coolly carved corridor that intersects what has become Treaty 7 and Treaty 4 land, a meeting place for the Blackfoot and the Cree for centuries, and the home of the Métis as well. Lastly, I would like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my role at Medicine Hat Public School Division. It is, however, about celebrating the community in which I live and work in, and as with any small community, there will be an intersection of guests and roles that reference my work with the school division. Our guest today is Luke Fandrick. Luke, known as Editing Luke to his many social media followers, is a born and raised Medicine Hat filmmaker and photographer. His TELUS original documentary, Your Cinema Needs You, has been shown at over 30 film festivals worldwide. His film has garnered 14 awards in that time. Luke has become sort of a digital biographer of Medicine Hat. Using his keen eye and a nose for a story, he is the perfect guest to explore thoughts on the intersection of community and identity. Enjoy today's show. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today. When I was thinking about doing a thing about identity and Medicine Hat, you were somebody I had on my list right from the start, and thinking that here's a person who has kind of made a career out of checking out the identity of people in Medicine Hat, and so super pumped to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
So I was thinking back to when we chatted a couple weeks ago talking about this, and you said you made a conscious decision to want to stay in Medicine Hat and tell stories about Medicine Hat, and I was just thinking about what drove that thinking for you?
Yeah, well, conscious decision. That's not really how it started. It was after film school. I ended up back in Medicine Hat because I was broke and was living in mom and dad's basement right out of school. But that was kind of a period to sort of like regroup a little bit. Yeah. And, I was still wanting to make movies like I had just done in university, and Medicine Hat was pretty stagnant. There wasn't really anything happening here. And so I kind of went out of my way looking for a way to make things that were in my own backyard, so to speak. And that's kind of what, I guess, pushed me to experiment a lot more to see, okay, well, what is possible in Medicine Hat? And at the time, I was working with a local production company who was doing corporate-style videos. And it was a really good learning experience to kind of see how a business could operate here, and the structure of turning something in Medicine Hat into a business when it didn't seem possible here.
Yeah.
And I had played around with them for about a year, and in the background was sort of looking at different things to think, okay, well, maybe I could do something about Medelta potteries, or I could do something about the Monarch, or there was all these other little things that I was like, when you go to looking for information about a lot of these things, you're not finding anything. And I was like, this kind of seems like low-hanging fruit because no one else is claiming this.
Yeah.
And, and it's still an interesting story. These kind of stories exist everywhere, but in a place like Vancouver or Toronto, where I'd kind of thought I would end up, those stories have been covered
multiple
multiple
probably.
times in numerous ways. And so then, like I said, in Medicine Hat, it kind of felt like, well, if no one else is doing this, maybe I should try this. And I got some traction early on where it was sort of like, when people are looking for this stuff, they're finding me. And within, I want to say, 2 or 3 years, I was kind of finding that, okay, there's a good side hustle going.
Yeah.
And I want to say probably after 5 years, there was enough business that I was like, I could probably do this full time now. And like I said, was looking for a way, not just, should probably define that a little bit. I wasn't just looking for a way to make it viable, but I was looking for a way to tell stories. Right. I didn't want it to just be the production corporate side that I'd been doing with this other company. I wanted it to actually be narrative and documentary and, finding a way of making this feel like I haven't seen other people do this here.
Right.
So that was kind of my push. And there was all these little opportunities to do this in very small ways at first that eventually grew into doing bigger projects.
Right. So born and raised Hatter.
Yep.
What's your first memory of this place?
Oh, that's tough. I remember, to be honest, I remember not really being a fan of Medicine Hat as a kid. It felt like we were in the middle of nowhere, and we kind of were. There was, you're seeing all your influences, and they always felt like they were somewhere else. Yeah. And that even goes for Alberta. It always felt like everything was outside of where I was. And I think I remember in like high school doing projects around like the ruins in the Clay District and having no understanding of what they even were or about the history of any of that stuff. It was mostly just, this is kind of a neat area that feels like, I've heard a lot of people talk about natural gas here and the pottery industry and things that were kind of like, I don't really have an interest in it, so to speak, but it was leaving an impression, I guess, because you were playing around in it, and it took going away and coming back to sort of look at it completely differently and say, actually, this is really interesting. And the more I sort of would dive into that history a little bit, I was like, there's more here than I realized. And that, my impression of Medicine Hat evolved quite a bit because the more you travel and the more you do other things, the more you start to view where you're from or just what's close to you as being unique in its own right. And so it started to develop more of an identity then. And I started to feel like, actually, there's an approach I can take to Medicine Hat that I've been taking or thinking about with all these other locations, that I can apply that mentality to my hometown and look at it like a tourist would or someone who's never, experienced this place before. And suddenly it was like, oh, this is novel. This is really interesting to me now. So, I don't know. My first memories of it were being the middle of the prairies and really isolated and sort of lacking in a lot of the, I don't know, like the bigger picture stuff. It didn't seem to be here. But again, I was kind of glazed about about that to begin with.
There's a children's book, young adult book called The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Finkweiler.
Okay.
And in that story, the young girl who's like 12 decides to run away, and she's going to run away. She lives outside of New York. She's going to run away to New York, and she's going to go live inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But she doesn't have enough money, so she has to bring her little brother with her on the train. And he's asking her, why are you running away? And she goes, well, I need to go away and come back different. Or I have to think different. And he corrects her grammar, saying, well, you mean think differently. And she said, no, I need to think different because I need to go away and see some part of the world and do something so that I can actually come back to my home to get that appreciation to think about it differently. And that line is stuck with me because I've felt that in career moves. I've felt that in all sorts of ways where you need to kind of go away and come back different. Well,
and you don't even have a frame of reference is the problem. Is when you're younger, you're influenced by the movies you watch or the music you listen to or the books you read. And unless you're in a major center, it always feels like none of that is here. Because I remember, speaking of like being a kid, I remember sort of having this epiphany when someone talked about like the Wild West, and then realized like, oh, we're in the Wild West. This was Wild West because, you know, we have Stampede and we have all the stuff that is kind of ingrained in our culture as Albertans, that this is what it's supposed to look like here. And having that realization, it was sort of like, oh, there is a history here that you kind of gloss over just because it feels so familiar, and that there was never a big introduction to it. It was just always there. And I think that's what you struggle with growing up in a place that you don't see, is that you feel like, I want it to be visible. I want someone bouncing these ideas back to me all the time to tell me this is why this is an interesting place to be. And so then when you're not seeing it, you're kind of feeling like, okay, I need to be somewhere else. And like I said, when you go away and then come back, suddenly you feel like, oh, this is new to me. And I can look at it with this fresh lens that makes me appreciate why it's different than other places.
No pun intended on the lens.
Yeah.
So was film school always in the cards from you? Like when was that?
Yeah, since I was a kid, I, you know, had been playing with the video camera and making movies with friends and doing stop motion and a lot of, you know, experimenting with the idea of making movies of some kind. I really had no direct formula of what that was going to look like career-wise. It was more so, I would love to just keep playing, and if there's an opportunity to do something, I would pursue that. Did I expect that this is where it would be? Absolutely not, because that wasn't even a reality. 20 years ago. It took YouTube and the internet and all these things to suddenly open up all these opportunities where I could be anywhere and I could be working from anywhere, and suddenly sharing these stories with a wide audience. And it didn't necessarily matter where I was, particularly because so much of what I've established in my business or my career is also personality driven in a lot of ways, where I'm the storyteller or I'm playing a role in introducing people to something. So like I said, it's to my benefit a lot of times to be in a place that people haven't necessarily heard of, or that feels like it's unusual or different. And particularly with the travel photography.
Because you're not limited, like, no matter how we've set up the start of this conversation, you don't just do work in Medicine Hat, right?
No, and actually none of my budgets are local anymore. It's like since, I want to say maybe 2018 or so, I think I've been pretty much 95% outside of Medicine Hat for the business. But being in Medicine Hat plays to my advantage a lot of times, because when I'm doing travel photography in, around the United States or in Europe or something like that, Medicine Hat is a place that a lot of people have never heard of. And that's immediately followed by, where is that? And why? Why are you there? And I think that kind of makes the point about having that novelty play into your career path, is that you want people curious about what you're doing all the time. And that's always the challenge in creating anything, is that you want people to care about what you're creating. And so having all these quirks, so to speak, that make it like, oh, you're not just like the last guy I talked to. Right. That suddenly it starts a conversation, makes people curious about what you're doing. And, that's half the battle sometimes.
Yeah, because is that what makes the subjects real? Or like, I would think that sometimes if you're doing that, let's say it's a photo shoot or something like that people can be pretty stiff and they want to go through this process and get it done or whatever that is, versus getting to the core of that person, which is probably more so in some form of natural conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's always the challenge, right? Yeah. You're trying to cut through the noise a little bit to try and get to the heart of something. There is no trick to doing that, but I think having icebreakers like that if you're passionate about what you're doing, if you're excited about an idea, if you're seeing something that maybe other people aren't seeing, that immediately helps to get the ball rolling. Because I think one of the interesting things I've always found is no matter where I go, you'll come across people who are always like, why did you come here? What is it about this? Because unless you're in like a major tourist zone, it's unusual a lot of times for people to see a travel photographer taking pictures of their main street, or, you know, doing things where there isn't necessarily a huge market for it. And to me, it kind of reinforces that point of like, well, it's new to someone.
Yeah.
Someone hasn't seen this. I haven't seen this. That makes it exciting. And again, when you have this context for so many of the places that you've gone about, like, okay, well, what is history that's happened in this part of the world? Or what is, you know, a pop culture reference that comes from this part of the world? Sometimes it's like, it's actually right on the surface, but people are jaded towards it, or they've overlooked it. And suddenly it's like, oh, well, yeah, I've lived in this place my whole life. Never even thought about that. And again, that kind of makes these places unique, and you can apply that exact same mentality to Medicine Hat.
I was going to say that might be a bit of the cheat code there, that as you're getting to see those things get unlocked when you're traveling around the world, bringing that fresh way of thinking and looking at things, or way of asking questions to people here to find those
well, when I was,
and,
I mean, still to this day, we said like Medicine Hat is kind of 5 years behind what is happening in a lot of the larger centers a lot of times. And so when I'd be going off to do these projects, or when I'm getting funding for one of these documentary projects or whatever, you'd come back to Medicine Hat and feel like, okay, I'm going to bring some of these people up to speed about here's how we can do this, here's how this will work. Because, there isn't obviously a huge business here for that to happen, but there are people who are interested in it and who are curious about it and who have traveled other places to go and pursue it. I think you'll find people who are naturally curious about all that stuff, but sometimes trying to bring people up to speed in a place where it's not happening is a benefit and a disadvantage, depending on how you want to look at that.
Yeah. So you've obviously demonstrated your skill with the video camera and with stills. And you were talking about going to other places. What is it that you're looking for? Like, what is it that you're looking for that will jump out and tell a good story?
I think that is the big question, isn't it? I think it's just about something that maybe surprises you or that you weren't expecting. Sometimes it is just about going down a bit of a rabbit hole where it can be as simple as, you know, you see an interesting looking building and maybe it's abandoned now, and you think, well, what was that? Why is that abandoned? Sometimes it's as simple as finding like an old photograph or a postcard, like the Medicine Hat series that I started way back right out of university was from finding this stack of old postcards that just happened to be 100 years. I think all these postcards were from like 1911, 1912, and I was in 2011 and 2012. And I was like, I'm just going to go to the places where the postcards were shot, and I'm going to take a picture from those same things to do a comparison. At the time, that seemed like such a simple exercise because it would be interesting to share the before and after of things. Yeah. But I had no idea that it would lead me down so many rabbit holes to find out who took this picture and what happened to this building that was in this picture, or something's in the background and you can't figure out where that is exactly. It was a reason to talk to a lot of people. And suddenly, when you feel like you've got a little bit of a project or you've got a question that is leading people come out of the woodwork to help you, and they want to go on this journey with you too, because they're like, oh, well, I know someone who worked at this location, or my dad owned this building, or so-and-so lived next door. And so, again, sometimes it creates a lot of noise, and you've got to filter all that to try and distill.
Be like an investigator getting tips.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of information, but that's the exciting part too, is that suddenly if you've got all these ingredients laid out before you, you can pick and choose. You can create this really unique recipe that someone else hasn't made before. And it starts as simple as that sometimes, where it's just being curious about something and thinking, well, what else has been done about this? What can I find when I search something online about this? And a lot of times if it comes up blank, you pose the question and you put that online, see if anyone takes the bait to get the ball rolling. Doesn't always work,
Yeah.
but when it does, it can be really exciting.
Do you have a favorite that came out of that, like say out of that postcard series or?
Well, I can tie this really easily into the documentary I did about the Monarch Theater, because I was really curious about the Monarch Theater in Medicine Hat and this claim that it was supposedly this oldest surviving theater, and I think at the time they were saying in Western Canada. And I was curious, well, what's the source, or what's the source of that claim, I guess, to sort of get some information, because I would go looking and there was really nothing. And it was kind of this big dead spot online where you were really curious about this. And that became this, I guess, this lightning rod to sort of say, okay, who's connected to this place? Does anybody have any photos in their album? Did anyone work here as a teenager and you took pictures with your friends here? What's in the newspaper archive? What's in the Esplanade archive? You were finding all these little bits and pieces that didn't have a story connected to them. And there also wasn't enough just with what I was finding scraps that didn't connect any dots. So I took a lot of those pieces and I tried to frame them in a way that I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on, say, the 60s. There'll be a lot of people who remember going to the Monarch Theater in the 60s as a kid. And I was like, what do you remember about this? Like, tell me what you remember about, say, 2nd Street downtown. What was the schedule like? Would you go to matinees? Would you go to the evening show? I started using those little bits and pieces to start constructing this story that was suddenly really rich, because you had this tapestry of people who were like, yeah, we used to go out for lunch and then we would come see a matinee show and mom and dad would give us like change or whatever, and we'd go down to the theater and walk there by yourself, and people were lined up around the block, and you were getting a picture that didn't exist anywhere. There was no photographs of any of this. There was no written story somewhere that I could even read this history. But bit by bit, I was getting this really detailed tapestry of the history of the Monarch Theater. And that was incredibly exciting, because not only was it a cool story for the Monarch Theater, but it was also the story of movie theaters. It was like, you didn't even have to know about the Monarch Theater or Medicine Hat. It could have been any movie theater in North America. And there was something that people could gravitate towards. And they would see a clue that I'd posted about the Monarch Theater, and they'd be like, well, this reminds me of this one in Toronto. This reminds me about this one. So that was really exciting to be a part of, because you could sense that other people were getting excited about it too, that they were sharing things that they didn't even know that they remembered.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think finding those early clues and then having people like latch onto them or take ownership of them so that I could utilize it to build this bigger story. There was so many moments in doing the documentary where it was kind of like moment after moment after moment where I was like, this is amazing content and material that I can sculpt into something. That has to be.
And did you see it as a documentary right from the start?
The goal, like from the very get-go, was it was always kind of this passion project that I had on the back burner, and I was like, I don't even know if I'm ever going to get money to do it, but I'm going to have this rough idea, because there's a saying too that, guys who are into film love movies about film. And that was always a thing in film school. It was like, if it's a movie about Hollywood or a director or an actor, it's like everyone gravitates towards it. So I was like, a movie about a movie theater. I was like, that would be my passion project. I've got to do something about this. But it was like I had this at the same time as I was doing those early shoots around Medicine Hat. I had this idea that would be such a cool movie, but I was like, there's never going to be a budget for that in Medicine Hat. How is this ever going to happen? But I was curious because of that story that I couldn't find. And I was like, well, the movie theater's been here for over 110 years. It must have changed so much in that amount of time, because everything else around it has changed so much. And why is it still
the last
here?
One standing?
Like why is the Monarch the one that survived when all of these other like movie palaces and like incredibly elaborate theaters didn't stand the test of time, and suddenly there was this one just sitting here in Medicine Hat? And I think the other interesting part of that story is when I had started, around that like 2011, 2012, Second Street was dead. There was really nothing happening on Second Street. And there was suddenly this like early wave of things changing. They were going to do a huge renovation on the utilities on the street and redo like all the sidewalks, and some of the buildings had been purchased and they were starting to redo the fronts of them, the Beverage and Inspire and Station. There was like a lot of activity suddenly happening, and it felt like, okay, I've suddenly got all these great pictures of a street that seemed dead, and now it's coming back to life in front of me as I'm starting to do some of these early shoots. So I had these pictures I did a walkthrough of the Monarch Theater back then, and I had these pictures where the film projector was still in place, the basement was pretty much untouched, and I was like, I would love to use these for something someday. And it took a decade before I actually had the funding and all these pieces kind of came together to make a movie about it. But I was like, that was always on my mind, that because I'd done this early exploration, that there was something there, and that, you know, it was an exciting story to me personally that I wanted to pursue.
And you had like the range of people in like Brian Laidlaw. I grew up with his son Jeff, and so I've known him from forever. And I was just like going, oh, I know that person, and
and that's the exciting thing about doing a story like that in Medicine Hat too. When you're going to cover that much time, is that you're hitting multiple generations, and like I said, the people who was like next door neighbors to someone who worked with someone, or you know, people who worked at the Monarch directly. It was like generations of kids have all grown up at the Monarch Theater, and so that was such an interesting pool of people to draw from. Who it was like, yeah, I remember what this place looked like in the 50s, and I remember what it looked like in the 70s. I remember what it looked like in the 90s, and there was all these people that had all these really interesting perspectives on the exact same place. Yeah. So it was really cool to grab a lot of that, and then, like I said, find the thread that connected all that, which was a huge task, but really exciting to do that, because it felt big. And for Medicine Hat, a lot of times, like I said, you kind of feel like that never happens here. You never get this retrospective that is essentially going back to when the city started up until modern day. Yeah. And so I was like, well, people can watch this and gravitate to numerous different parts of the story, or find something that was like, this was the part that interested me the most, or I like this part the most. That's incredibly exciting, because you think that, well, everyone's going to respond to this in sort of the same way, but that wasn't the case at all. You were sort of like, I've tapped into something where I can tell people are getting excited because of their own experience. They've got something that they're bringing to this that elevates the whole thing.
They almost feel like they're an extra.
For sure.
In the movie. They're not in it. But
like I said, when you have people who grew up in that space, they come back in there and then watch that movie, and they were like, well, this is my perspective on it, because this is I'm remembering it in a very select point in time. And I was like, you know, I was doing that too. And sort of not even realizing my bias sometimes, because you're just sort of like, well, it kind of changed that much. But it's about the movies that you saw there, and it's about the friends that you went with, and, you know, all these other like variables that influence the story. But because it was so broad in its scope, it was like there was so many little bits and pieces in there.
So that thread that you talked about, because that was actually the question I was thinking about. Like, well, did that thread give you any insight into the identity of Medicine Hat? Was there something common through that thread other than the theater itself?
I don't know. It's funny, because in a weird way, it made Medicine Hat feel like it wasn't so different from all these other places. I was like, there was this, I think that a lot of times I approach it where it was like Medicine Hat felt lesser than, or, you know, it felt too small.
Behind the times.
Yeah. And when I was doing that project, I was like, the exciting part about it to me was that it makes Medicine Hat feel on par with like New York City and, you know, all these other random places that I was looking up the history of theaters. because all of the movie theaters came along at kind of the same time. Film is a relatively new medium. It was all developing at the same time. So the fact that Medicine Hat got its theater at the same time as New York City did, and that, when LA was building all these movie palaces and stuff, I was like, that makes Medicine Hat feel bigger in the story to me. And I think that was the goal in some ways, was to make people look at Medicine Hat as not being just the middle of nowhere, but that actually people travel all over the place all the time, and you could be from Medicine Hat and you could still go somewhere else and you'd come back, but you don't hear about it because it's small and there wasn't a lot of people. And so I think making Medicine Hat feel richer and connected to all these other places was sort of reinventing what Medicine Hat meant to me, that it wasn't just about being on the outskirts. It was actually, people saw the premiere of Star Wars in Medicine Hat at the same time as they saw it everywhere else.
For sure, yeah.
There was there was so many moments like that where I was kind of like, it's not nowhere. And the Monarch proves it. The Monarch proves it's not nowhere. So that was kind of the reinventing, I think, the stigma I had about small hometown.
Were you when it started the show here? Talk a little bit about the film festivals too. But when it started to show here, were you surprised by the community's response?
Oh, for sure. I like the idea of even doing the premiere was more of a ceremonial end. I was kind of like, well, it just makes sense. It's been building up to having something happen at the Monarch because it had been stagnant for those 2 or 3 years where we're kind of waiting to see if anything was going to happen. And as I was waiting to do that, I was like, well, that's got to be the end of this story, is that someone's going to step in and do something with it. And naturally, here's the story of the Monarch. It's got to play there.
Yeah.
But I was thinking like, we'll do 1 or 2 nights of this premiere. And the community got so excited about it and told everyone they knew about it that it kind of took on a life of its own a little bit, where I was like, I can probably sell out a couple nights because of, my following, and I can tell people about it and people want to come and see it. But we ended up doing like 16 shows. Yeah. And so it was like,
and people still want more.
Oh, and people still talk about it. Like, we haven't had the wide release yet. Even people were like, well, there was all these people who don't live in Medicine Hat who were like, I want to watch the movie about the Monarch. So yeah, the response was incredible, and it was people who had no idea about my work or anything like that. It was just like, oh, there's a movie about the Monarch Theater. We should go see that. And people were talking about it and saying we should come out and see it. And yeah, to have the community rally around it and, again, share so many stories after it was already done, it was kind of like, this is incredible, because I had no idea that people were so passionate about it, or that they did find something, like I said, find something in the story that really resonated with their own personal experience, that they took claim of it too then. Yeah. So that was... that's the dream. Obviously, you want to create something that people are excited about and they want to talk about and elevate the whole experience for you. But yeah, there was no way I could have predicted that it was going to go like that.
Yeah. So then it's, how many film festivals have you been in?
I think it was like 31 or so. Yeah, we had like over 30 official selections and 12 different countries. Yeah. Over 25 cities. I can't remember. Oh, my stats are a little bit blurred together now. But yeah, over 30 selections, which was...
But you didn't get to go to all of them.
I didn't get to go to pretty much any of them. I was peripheral to everything that was happening.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because you think like there'd be something to do. Yeah. But when you think about it, it's like, you go to the movie theater, you sit in the dark with everybody else, and then it's over. You kind of like, you hear everything after the fact. And the nice thing about, I guess, having myself kind of be the storyteller or be a part of it was that people did feel like, okay, I should reach out to this guy after the fact. And then, again, it's the power of the internet of, it didn't really matter where it was. Suddenly it was like, oh, it's easy to connect with this guy. It's in the program. I can reach out to them, and you had everyone sharing stories after the fact that sort of reiterated everything that I've been saying, that it was like it didn't matter where you were from. You could connect with the story of a place like Medicine Hat and put your own hometown in there, or put the theater that you grew up with in the place of the Monarch.
Yeah.
And it felt just as compelling.
Right. And bring back, because you said the thread of the movies and the thread of movie theaters, but there's also would be a thread too of how people would remember spending their recreational time in the 1950s or the 1960s, right? Because it wouldn't have been too different across different communities.
The current state of movie theaters today. I mean, like I say, the Monarch has lasted, but most of them haven't. Most people have lost the theater a long time ago, or they remember like, yeah, this was the theater we used to go to all the time. It's closed now, or it got demolished. And I think that element of the story is kind of what made it a different experience too, because it wasn't a eulogy for the movie theater. It was like, actually, they can be saved, and people will rally around them, and people are, I think, hungry for that experience too, because we become a little bit disconnected from everything. And you think about, how much you watch things on streaming and you don't even remember it the next day because it's too easy. It's sort of just, it'll automatically play the next thing. You don't even have to choose it anymore. But when you would go to the movie theater with people, you were making a conscious decision to go out and make an evening of it and hang out with people and create an experience, and also sit there and watch the movie as opposed to being on your phone or having a conversation. It was like you're actually consuming something. And so that experience is being lost a little bit. And I think people, when they have it again, feel this sense of like, this is amazing. And again, to put it back to like the premieres, I think that's why the premieres were so fun, was because you had these sold out crowds who were reacting to everything at the same time and were laughing at the same time, or who were getting teary-eyed, or, it was communal, and people resonated around that and suddenly left the theater feeling like, I want to save the Monarch now. I don't want to see this go. I feel like I've had this incredible experience here, and I get what it's trying to do. And again, have this appreciation for my community, my hometown. I think everyone who came to one of the shows left feeling like, well, this made me look at Medicine Hat differently because I haven't done this in Medicine Hat before. I mean, what else can you compare that to when you've got a story that's about the movie theater that you were sitting in and watching that movie? Like, that's a unique thing to do.
You gave me just a flash of a memory of, it wasn't going to a matinee, but it would be going to a movie in the summer, 7:00 show, and because the sun is in the sky so late, finishing the movie and coming outside and it's still light out. And that feeling of coming out and thinking, like, you're pumped because of whatever you just watched and you want to talk about it, but you could still go and do stuff. And I just, that as you were talking there, that was just kind of flooding over me. Lots of good memories.
A lot of, it's funny because so many of those memories are kind of mundane things, but it was like, that was sort of the fun part of collecting so many of those stories, because it was a lot of that. It was like, I remember waiting in line when it was like a Friday night and you were meeting your friends, and you'd go stand in that long line because you were waiting to get into the lobby, and just being like, I'm so excited to see this movie. I've been seeing the previews all week about this on TV. And then, it created this experience, but it's kind of ordinary. And I think that is kind of beautiful in a way, because you don't necessarily highlight those moments very much. But when you think about how many people had that experience, suddenly you're like, that's an incredible communal thing again, that makes people feel connected to something, because it resonates with people when you say, like, do you remember being in high school and going to the movie theater and being excited to see your friends in the line as you got up? It was like, of course I do. That was such a good feeling.
You're trying to sneak into the movie that requires you to be 18, and the friend at the front of the line tries to get a deal by asking for one youth. And you're like, come on.
Well, and just, the spending your allowance at the concession and all this other stuff. It's like all these very minute things that people just have this soft spot for. It just makes them, again, appreciate your youth, appreciate the community you grew up in, and again, remember things about it. Remember like the locations or the smells or, things that unless someone asks you about them, you don't even realize that I remembered that because it doesn't come up in conversation.
Yeah. So you wrote on your blog recently that like the basically the tour of the movie, and we haven't even said the name of the movie.
Your cinema needs you.
Yes. Probably should mention that Tellus was part of that.
Yes,
too.
it was a Tellus original. Started in 2021 and then premiered at the end of 2023 and is about to be released beginning of 2025 here.
And what does wide release mean?
So it goes up on their, they've got like a special platform that's just for Tellus originals.
Yeah.
So you might have noticed, getting into the weeds a little bit, but you might have noticed things like Kudo and stuff like that. They have bundles now that include Tellus as part of their streaming platform. So it's listed with all these other platforms to see it. And I think they're pushing for that to be a national thing where it's specific to the Tellus Originals program. But yeah, there's also potential opportunity for it to still go other places and for us to, we've already had people reach out about, we've got this old movie theater. We think this movie would be great to play here. So potentially putting this other places is on the table too still.
But it's been a whirlwind year.
It's been an incredibly long process to do this. I mean, originally it was supposed to be like a year-long production schedule and then it was going to be over. But it was because of the fact that the Monarch, there was all these whispers about the Monarch was potentially going to get bought or someone was going to reopen it. And I was like, well, that's going to immediately change the story because that's kind of what I was hoping for, was that something would happen. And either it's going to take forever and then it was like, okay, we'll do this as a way of saying somebody buy the Monarch and do something with it because we've made this movie about it. Or it was like, well, I want to get some credit for that because we've done all the legwork to get people excited about it that, I've been kind of in lockstep with a lot of the guys who are running the Monarch now because we brought thousands of people out just to see the documentary as a way of reopening the Monarch Theater. So it kind of introduced a whole new demo to the Monarch that had kind of forgotten about it for a decade or so because they didn't even know it was there. So yeah, there's been a lot that's kind of happened in a brief amount of time and also a very long amount of time, depending on how you want to look at that. But
I was when I was doing the research, I wanted to talk to you about I think it was the 2012 Hometown series. Is that the postcard?
Yes,
that was the postcard series.
Yeah, so that one is kind of changed a little bit over the years. Originally, it was called Around the Hat, where it was kind of like, okay, I was finding the postcards and then I was doing these comparison things. It morphed into the Hometown series over lockdown because I was sort of like, I'm going to do a refresh on this whole thing. I'd kind of, after a decade of sort of doing this sporadically in the background, I was like, I'm pretty much covered everything I can think of to cover. But because a decade had gone by, I was like, the stuff that I shot a decade ago, some of it's archival now, where it had changed completely. And like I said, the Monarch images opened up the idea for a new project to happen because you had this material that was suddenly different. And there was a lot of that. So yes, it became the Hometown series. And it morphed a little bit into becoming, I'm going to take a picture. Again, this was like lockdown type mentality where it's like, I'm going to take a picture every day for like a couple months and I'm going to post a picture every single day and see how I can try and find a different view of the Samus Teepee or Medelta or things that I'd seen thousands of times already. And that kind of elevated the series too, because it wasn't just about history anymore. It wasn't just about, interesting views of things. It was sort of like the everyday. It was the weather is interesting today, or, I'm going to go for a walk and just see what I see and share something. And it was this motivation to kind of feel like I had to make something every day that, it changed I think the scope of what the project even was, because it was such a large amount of material after so many years of sort of randomly doing this, that I was like, I should curate this a little bit. I should look at everything that I've got now. I'm going to call it all the hometown series because it's just all my hometown. And depending on what I wanted to do with it, you could frame it in a million different ways. It's like I could make this about historic locations. I could make this just about really nice landscapes. I could make it about specific people who were doing something. I could, there was enough random material in there that I could tell stories on numerous different things if I wanted to. But yeah, it became a really interesting point in time because a decade had gone by that it was the first time that I really, I think, tried to contextualize it and take a step back and say, what do I even have here? And what was I doing? What was the point of this? Because it was kind of like I was doing it because I thought this would be interesting content early on. It was an easy thing to share online. And, when you're in the middle of a big project, sometimes there's not really a lot of visuals to share when you're editing for months on end. But this was an easy way to have something to share all the time. So when I contextualized it and kind of looked back, I was like, yeah, there's a lot of different things I could do here. But it was also, I think it made me want to share it in a new way where I was like, I want to start calling this the hometown series and have it, like I said, referenced in a way where I feel like it's maybe a little bit grander or bigger than what I'd been giving it credit for, because I don't know that there's a lot of people who have the library of material that I have accidentally in a way where the plan was not to make it this big or just to keep doing it forever. It just was always easy. It was what was there. And like I said, lockdown. Yeah. It's kind of stuck here. Couldn't do any travel photography. So I was like, I'm going to be shooting a lot of Medicine Hat for a couple of years. I should refresh a lot of this. And it was exciting to kind of go back and look through all that.
And so when you said you wanted to sit down and see, like, what do I have here? Like, what did you find?
Evolution, I think, was the coolest thing. Is I noticed I covered like 2nd Street transform. I'd covered it when it was abandoned and suddenly it was changed. Monarch was another prime example. It's like the projector had switched out and the facade has changed and the marquee is gone and all these things that were like small, where it's like you wouldn't necessarily know, I'm going to go cover this today and it's going to be because I want to get the shot of this sign. But you'd go back and look and it was like, oh, these signs are gone that used to be here. Or, the trees in this park have been cut down because they moved something around or they built something. It was a lot of little things like that. But that was the part that I think was really interesting, was to see the work become archival, where you were doing it in the moment because it just felt like, oh, this is ordinary. This is kind of how Medicine Hat always looks. And then you go back through it and you're like, actually, this has changed way more than I thought it did. And that I've got the material that I don't think anyone else has. Because to bring it back to the documentary, that was the whole problem in even trying to do the documentary, was you would think there was going to be all these pictures and footage and all this stuff. And then I was like, I'm going to have to create most of this because it doesn't exist. People didn't take a ton of pictures of the Monarch Theater. People didn't take a ton of pictures of 2nd Street even. And you'd think, well, how could that be? It's the main street. Yeah. But there's just, you'd go and look at the, and there's maybe more pictures in people's family albums and stuff like that. That's kind of what I had to draw on too. But you go to the archive and I think I had maybe 20 images from a century. Wow. And you're like, I can't make
and that's like that, like the city hall was right there.
Well, and it's just, it's not prominent enough is part of the problem.
Right.
It wasn't,
makes sense,
it was kind of blurred into the street.
Yeah.
So you didn't always notice it depending on how you were taking a picture of things. Yeah. But I was like, a century and only 20 images, that's insane to me. Where I was like, I probably got more archival images of the Monarch Theater than anybody else. And I've only been doing this for 10 years. So that was kind of eye-opening. But again, that evolution in general of taking pictures of Medicine Hat was really fun to kind of go back and look at, because it made me regret even not doing more of it, because suddenly I was like, oh, if like now that I can see it, it's like you don't even know that you're doing it over that amount of time because it's such a slow progression. But I was like, I went back and it was like, I've got a picture of like the Sears sign at the Medicine Hat Mall, and I got a picture of like, you know, the Target, and all these little like random things that were just nothing. I mean, they're not the kind of picture where I was like, oh, I'm going to do prints of this. Right. But there was just everyday ordinary stuff where something in my mind was like, oh, I'll just take a picture of that because that might be interesting.
Now it's nostalgia.
And now all that stuff is gone. And you, like I said, if someone's looking for pictures of that stuff, I might be one of the few people who actually has it.
Yeah.
And that part of it is kind of really cool, because as a storyteller or filmmaker or whatever, you're always looking for an angle. You're always looking for something that's going to be a little bit different than someone else would do. And you never really think that it's going to be something that ordinary, where it was like, I took a picture of the mall, or I took a picture of, you know, the convenience store shelves, and then suddenly all the brands start to change.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, where you're kind of like, it's really cool to have the minutia in everyday life and then be able to reference it somehow into something bigger, or, you know, pull inspiration from these little bits and pieces just because you were experimenting or playing and seeing like, okay, I'll come back to that one day and see if there's something actually there. A lot of times there's not. I talk about that too, that it's like you can capture a lot, and stuff from 10 years ago, a lot of it does look exactly the same as it does today. But when you find those moments in there, I think that's the exciting part.
Yeah, it's, that made me think of how Stranger Things did such a good job of that, of pulling the, like, whether that was the right font or the right convenience store shelf or the thing, and how that can just pull you back to a completely different time.
Yeah. Well, life. And you know, I've said it already, but the idea of doing like context building, it's just the whole idea of, we're talking about like Medicine Hat and identity, and trying to get a stereotype almost of what does Medicine Hat look like. And that was always something that was on my mind too. I was like, okay, I'm going to obviously have a shot of the teepee in there because everyone thinks of that as being a symbol of the city. But then I was like, okay, maybe I'll have a piece of Medelta pottery mixed in, and then maybe you'll have a natural gas well, or a cowboy hat, or, you know, like all these little things that individually by themselves are pretty insignificant, but as a scope of doing a bigger picture of something, I was like, it's all in the detail. You're always looking for like these very random small things that end up telling this bigger story. And that became the fun part in all of the projects that I was doing, whether it was travel photography or filmmaking. It was always about detail work. It's like, I'm going to try and do something where I'm focusing on something that maybe people aren't always looking at, or coming at this from a different angle so that I can introduce it in a way that doesn't feel so familiar. Because this is the other part I think I mentioned too, is that people are so jaded about the place that they are if they're not constantly getting it reflected back to them in a way that makes them refresh. Because the number of people who, like, I think downtown in general is kind of a prime example. People have the memory of downtown from whatever they did downtown last. And if people haven't been downtown in 15 years, they're remembering it from 15 years ago and then never refreshing that image of it. And I think that is kind of one of the reasons why doing like the hometown series or the documentary became so exciting for people to watch or participate in, is because it made them refresh. It forced them to look at something that they've seen thousands of times and say, actually, I've never actually really stopped and looked at that. Yeah. You know, it's something, the Monarch, prime example too. It's like a number of people who didn't even realize that the marquee has been gone for a decade.
Right. I would have been one of them.
Yeah.
I had to go back outside and look.
Well, and it's like, you see the old picture of it and you're like, I recognize that immediately.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been gone for over a decade now.
Yeah.
And again, because there's no fanfare or attention drawn to it, you just get on with your life. And someone points that out and you're like, yeah, I haven't been looking that closely. And you can apply that to so many different places around town.
Yeah.
But again, that's kind of the fun of it is that you're constantly trying to do that refresh to make people focus on something. Say, look at this, look at how it's changed, or look at how unique that is when you're comparing it to all these other things. Yeah, it's a creative exercise.
So you alluded to this earlier, especially in the travel photography piece.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to all sorts of communities, big and small. Follow your Editing Luke account. You can see your travels.
Yep.
How long, or just walk us through a little bit of that process of how are you getting an impression or getting a feel for the personality of that community, or what are the details that you're looking for?
Well, so I always try and think of it like I'm exploring. Hi. It's always approached with the sense of like, okay, if I'm exploring this and I'm trying to describe this to someone, how would I describe it? Everyone is always going to get the establishing shot. Everyone's going to get like the shot of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. But I was like, how many people are going to get the shot of what the ground looks like at the Eiffel Tower? And how many people are going to get the shot of like the souvenir stands that are right there? How many people are going to get the shot of like, you know, the light as it changes from day to night in this location? It was things like that where I was like, if I was describing this to someone and I wanted to paint a picture of it, I can't just describe the Eiffel Tower. I have to describe all the things that are happening around it so that you get a sense of a scene. And this is where the filmmaking side always played into it, is because you always have to get coverage when you're doing your shot list. So it's like, yes, you start with an establishing shot, but I need my close-ups, I need my mediums, I need my subjects in there. And so essentially the travel photography was just me working backwards from what I was doing with filmmaking, because you're removing motion and sound. It's easier to shoot the stills, but you want the coverage. And so that's always been my approach, is that I want to have the ability to tell a story with how I piece these together. And, you know, unfortunately, there's not a lot of magazines anymore, but you still do photo spreads for your online stuff. I still have photo sets on the blog and stuff like that, where you can scroll through them and feel like I'm getting a sense of this location, because it's not just that one establishing shot all the time. It's, you know, it's a shot of my feet standing somewhere. It's a shot of something I'm holding in my hand. It's a shot of the detail of the wall or the posters that are on this location. And then you go through that and you feel like there's a narrative element to this, because I could tell a story in a bunch of different ways just from all of these random little bits in there. And so, yeah, it's exploring. And again, I think leading with a lot of the way that you're shooting things, it's like, I want someone to feel like they're on this experience with me. So I don't put myself, like, I'm not a model in the shoots. It'll be like my feet. It'll be my hands, because someone else can picture themselves in my place. And that's kind of how I'm building it a lot of times, is that I want someone to feel like they're moving into the next room with me, and then they're going up the stairs, and then they're looking at the view from up there, and then they went down to the basement, or then they're out on the street. And that's kind of always been my approach, is that I want it to feel like they're seeing it for themselves, so that it's not just about me, even though it is still kind of about me. But
and is there a place that's, say, off the beaten path that you found that you went, oh, this is super cool?
I mean, there's been hundreds. The amount of times that I've done travel shoots where I'm road tripping are some of my favorites, because you will hit so many random roadside attractions or small towns, places that, again, never get the coverage, but they feel cinematic in a way, because it is untapped. It's this low-hanging fruit idea is kind of what I always keep coming back to, is that, I wonder how many people have actually stopped here and took a picture of this place. And I remember that was kind of the first, some of the first travel shooting I did was just in Alberta. I was like, I'm actually going to start pursuing this, but I'm going to do a full refresh. I'm going to go up to Calgary and Edmonton. I'm going to do all the national parks. I'm going to do the Badlands and Drumheller. I'm going to cover all these random little small towns again, just so that I got a sense of like, what is Alberta to me? And when I did that, I was like, this whole formula that I've kind of been forcing myself to do, I can do that everywhere.
Right.
That'll apply to everywhere. And then how many places are there out there that never get coverage, that never get the shots? I was like, that's the market. And I that's why I kind of chased that a little bit too, because that was Medicine Hat.
Right.
That's some of the first travel stuff I sold was to tourism Medicine Hat and to the city and the Esplanade and stuff like that, where it was sort of like, yeah, unless Travel Alberta was sending someone to Medicine Hat, a lot of times there wasn't that kind of coverage.
Right.
It was always sort of just, again, these big establishing shots.
Yeah.
There's Medicine Hat for you. But it was like, well, now it's only escalated because social media has made it way more urgent to constantly have like, well, what's happening at the coffee shops and what's happening, with the concerts, and having visuals is such a big part of how we consume everything now that it's not so foreign. But again, having the overarching approach where you're like, okay, I'm not just going to get the highlights again, but I'm going to try and tell a story with what I'm doing. I think that's probably what differentiates my approach to a lot of the pursuit of what I'm doing, is that most people will not go through that, go through the hassle of covering that much, because they're like, well, what am I ever going to do with this? But that's, I think, what's always been compelling to me, and even doing it was finding those places that were always like, well, no one else is getting this.
Do you have people? Do you have people now, whether that's in Medicine Hat or elsewhere, say, we've got this place that nobody else is getting? Will you come and draw attention to this?
Not. It's actually always more reverse.
Yeah.
It's actually, you'll do
You start
something,
to do the digging,
and then someone goes and searches, and they find me. That's generally the way it happens, is because, you don't even know who to reach half the time. But when people are searching for something, then it's suddenly like, oh, well, if you've made an effort to make it searchable, then people will immediately gravitate towards it. Because, I mean, people forget too, it's like, again, this 10-year experience feels long and short at the same time. But 10 years ago, it was like there was hardly anything. You look like, even now, you look up locations in Medicine Hat, they don't even have a website. They don't list their hours. There's all these things where it's sort of like it's a void. And so when I started doing that, it was like it immediately populated Google Images. You look up Medicine Hat, I was like 70% of the images that were coming up, just because there were so many.
Yeah.
And because I was making them public. That was the other thing. It was like, you're not just shooting them and then hiding them away.
Right.
You're shooting them, and then you're tagging everything that you're shooting and putting it in these photo sets. So it was like, you look up Medelta potteries, you're finding Editing Luke at the same time as you're actually finding Medelta potteries.
Yeah.
So that was the whole approach with everywhere that I was going, that you'd go to the middle of nowhere, and I was like, if someone searches this, they're going to find me probably before they find like the city hall or the town hall's information, or if they do, it'll be like right
a
up
picture
there.
that you made of it or
So
took of it.
that was kind of the exciting part of it too, is because that was something I was just passionate about, regardless of doing the work. Was I was like, I just want to go see things that I haven't seen before, and I want to go find things and meet people, and it was just fun to kind of do that. And so a lot of the stuff that I was covering, sometimes I was like, well, this is never going to be a paid gig, but I'll have the material there. And like I said, you never know, that could turn into something down the road, or it inspires you to do something else because you experienced something or you saw something that you didn't even know you were interested in. That was, the creative exercise of it all was the fun.
In some ways, you went away from what you originally had and then came back to it again, like the COVID thing. What if, with that large archive of material and all of those experiences, like whether that's meeting people and talking to people, what have you learned about the people of Medicine Hat?
I think I've learned that people are complicated, and that they've got compelling stories, but don't necessarily have an outlet to share them. I think the number of times that I've ended up in a conversation with somebody who just by having that conversation, you've like unlocked something that they didn't know was there. Because things will go off on a tangent and you'll suddenly realize that this person was, you know, a neighbor to one of your family members or whatever. It was like stuff like that has always been really interesting to me because, like I said, people don't write it down. People don't record it. And so you'd be talking to someone and then you realize, like, if I don't do something with this or if I don't, you know, log this away somewhere, it's just going to disappear with time. And again, the Monarch documentary was a prime example of you must have had thousands of people over the century go in and out of the doors of that place. No one wrote anything down. No one took the pictures. And if they did, they got thrown out or, you know, the album was lost or, you know, no one developed them, whatever. But yeah, they get lost to time. And when you're in a place like Medicine Hat where if you're not actively trying to make something happen, well, life just goes on. And suddenly there's these blank spots. Well, you're looking back and can't find any pictures from 1957 or whatever because no one has put something there to find. So yeah, talking to people and having them, I guess, make a record of their own experience or something that will interest someone who is unrelated to them. There's so much potential there. I think that's what I get excited. I get excited about the potential of what that could be or what that could unlock, because that's how the stories start. You never know what you're going to be captivated by or the bigger picture that you're going to connect this to. But again, if you don't have the material, you can't do it. And there's so many people who you talk to and realize, like, that's an incredible experience that you've had, but you weren't thinking to like write that down or do something. I tie this into the documentary I made before the Monarch documentary was about Medelta. Specifically, it was about saving Medelta. So it was not what you'd go to see in the museum. It wasn't about the history of the clay district. It was about why did people look at the industrial ruins of this clay industry and think, let's make that into a museum. Let's make that into a place where people go and have a wedding. It's like, it seems so foreign to me that why that would even happen. But so I was like, okay, I want to make something out of this. I want to tell this story. I want to make a documentary about this. All the people who were involved and who had volunteered to do it, because it was largely volunteer driven, is how they even started to get some momentum. They're all in their late 70s and 80s. And that project came out in 2019, and I think we've lost 4 people already since that documentary came out. But I was like, the story isn't written. The story wasn't there. It was like, you'd go to this place has a museum. You can go to the museum at Medelta Potteries and learn about the history of it. But if you wanted to look up why there's even a museum there or why this was saved, that story didn't exist. And you had to talk to all these people and say, tell me how this happened. Tell me why you did this. And having that actually recorded and having it in their voice is so powerful. And you think about how much you could do that all over the city, all over everywhere to tell these stories. And most of the time it doesn't happen. So that's kind of, again, like that's the driving force a lot of times, is feeling like you're going to get something that even if I don't use it, if it's there, someone else might take inspiration. The other thing it reminds me of is that was kind of the thing I was thinking of when I was doing the shots with those postcards. I was like, can you imagine the person who took that picture 100 years ago thinking like, someone's going to find this postcard one day and he's going to use that as the inspiration to start his thing. That's kind of what I feel I'm doing. It's like I'm creating all this body of work from all over the place that you have no idea what's going to spark inspiration for someone. They're going to see something random that I stopped in a small town, or, you know, a random person that I talked to and say like, I want to make a story about this, or it's connected to something somehow. Like you never know what leads someone somewhere, but then that can turn into something so much bigger. That's the exciting part of doing this. And because that's how it happened for a lot of what I've done, that's, it's really exciting to think like 100 years from now, someone could be looking at the stuff that I've done after I'm gone and turn it into something completely different, something completely new, find a new thread that connects it to a bigger story, and, it gives them a basis to even work from. Yeah. I kept saying when I was doing the Monarch documentary, I was like, it'd be awesome if someone would have done this like 50 years ago. And then I was coming along and saying like, well, they've got all this great material from building this benchmark that I could look back on and then say, okay, I can build on all this now. But you have to do it all from scratch. And the problem is like, well, so many of those people are already long gone now. So there was like all these question marks. I was like, well, I don't know the real inspiration for why the original builders actually made it this way, or why they wanted it to look this way, or, where they were getting their ideas from. You're guessing based on what little scraps of information are left behind. But can you imagine if they'd actually sat down and said, like, I'm doing this because I was inspired by this theater that I saw in Europe, or I wanted to do this because the movies were exciting to me, or I saw my first movie here at this one spot, and it's like, movies are brand new and they're going to be the future. Like, can you imagine how cool that would have been? Yeah. So, it doesn't hurt to have the I think the raw material sometimes, because it can turn into something completely different, or someone else can find something in it that I didn't find. That's
what I like about that is it's a really hopeful thinking too, right? Like it's about possibilities, about this is, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but maybe this good thing.
Well, and that's my experience, right? That's from being back in Medicine Hat too, was sort of like, I'm gonna craft something here, because it started from a point of being stuck, of feeling like, okay, well, I'm gonna be in mom and dad's basement for a while, but I still want to do this. I still want to pursue this, and even if it doesn't exist in Medicine Hat, I'm gonna still make the time feel useful, so that I can take it to wherever I go next. And like I said, I had no idea that potential for it to grow in a way where I was suddenly, I'd made the career. I had made the career out of the scraps, and that it didn't feel so random anymore. And like I said, that's the exciting part about doing a lot of this, is that you're creating things all the time. You're creating opportunities, or you're creating stories, or you're pulling those pieces to try and find something that someone else missed, or, that would be interesting if you were in a bigger city. It is. You do have to be, I think, optimistic and hopeful about it, because again, it's that refresh. You're trying to always refresh, right?
And what's next for you?
Oh, geez, I don't know. There's a lot on the table. I mean, it's interesting coming off of this project, because it was multi-year. So it's kind of always been in the background, even though there's been travel shoots and a lot of other stuff still happening continuously while the film was being made. And then the film festival schedule was a whole other year. So I'm thinking there's probably going to be some continuation to some degree of potential follow-ups, or something involving how this story is evolving, because we really, I think, ended this last project with this new fresh start that's potentially like, okay, well, we saved the movie theater. What does that actually mean now? Right. What does what happens next? Because opening the doors is one thing, having it be a sustainable movie theater is a totally different thing. But I imagine, something connected to that will still be on the table. And then, of course, there's always new travel shoots, new places I want to go, and new things I want to see. And I don't know. It half the time you don't really necessarily have the map. You're constantly looking, and then something will kind of emerge. And I think particularly because the way that my work life has sort of evolved too, is that I'm not really taking on other people's projects anymore. I'm developing my own projects now all the time. So it's trying to, again, feel like I'm looking for inspiration, but I don't necessarily know where that is yet. I'm taking the fragments of what else has happened. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, what haven't I done? What do I want to do? And it's tough when you're, like I said, coming out of a project that has been on my mind for so long, is that you're trying to escape the bubble that you've been in a little bit. So
that makes sense.
So yeah, I don't necessarily know, but I imagine more documentary stuff is kind of where my focus is at, is because I really liked doing the longer form storytelling and being able to sink my teeth into something like that where you don't usually get that opportunity to actually fully flesh out such a big story like that is exciting.
Oh, and you're really good at it.
Well, thanks.
I really liked it. It was good. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah.
That was certainly the hope when you're putting years of work into something. You're like, I really hope that wasn't a wasted time.
I was thinking about the Medelta thing, and like the prisoners that were working down there, right? POWs. And I grew up up by the armories up there,
right?
And actually quite close to Selfview School. We moved there in 1974. My mom and dad built a house there for $28,000. And Gilwell Park is right there, and there's a big hill in that park. Like, so the Stampede grounds are here. My parents' house is here. Southview Church of God is here, and there's a big hill.
Oh, okay.
Here that we toboggan on and stuff, and then the Patterson Armories is further down here. And this, when they were doing the work on this park, as they were working over here, this was all, like, we were little kids and we'd be out there playing. This was all foundations here.
Oh yeah.
And this was the POW camp, this whole area.
Right.
And we were finding like canteens, like all sorts of, like, if you were to be able to excavate this hill, there is stuff.
Yeah.
This hill was built for a specific reason. And then I came across it was a CBC news story. It was about 20 minutes long. I think it had video about World War II and the POW camp that was there, and it was totally run by Nazis. It was just a Nazi. This was a Nazi-operated camp. The RCMP were there, but they basically stayed at the gates.
They still had the hierarchy.
Yeah, and there was a murder that happened inside one of the little buildings, and they actually have a picture of the guy hanging. Like, they hung him in the corner, kind of facing the corner. It was, and then I think the guy's last name was Mueller even. The two guys kind of became the patsies for it, and they were hung at the courthouse in Medicine Hat.
Oh wow!
But when I went to kindergarten, where Selfview School is now, those were the officer barracks. So there were still barracks over there. There weren't any houses. It was just military buildings. That's where I went. I went to kindergarten in one of these military buildings that is long since gone. And I always had this thought. I wonder what the connections were between what happened.
And that story too is that was one of the early ones that I had come across too when I was looking at early archival stuff, because you didn't even realize that camp, I think it was like the one in Medicine Hat and the one in Lethbridge, they were like the largest prisoner of war camps in Canada. It was like they were sending all of them here.
I know.
And so it was like, it's things like that where I always got excited when I felt like you were discovering something that connected Medicine Hat to the rest of the world. Yeah. And that's what, learning about that POW camp, there was a lot of material in there. And particularly because it connected to Medelta in the clay industry, connected to all these farmers who were using labor from the camp. And then it also connected because a bunch of them came back. Yeah. It was Medicine Hat had a German population. Yeah. And then all these people after the war who were prisoners ended up coming back to Medicine Hat because they liked it. Yeah. So it was like there was all these little, again, when you were looking for stories, it's interesting. You could approach this from so many different angles because it was such a big operation. Yeah. It was kind of fascinating.
Motivation Local is produced by Table 4 Productions with the generous support of TELUS Storyhive. You can find our episodes on Optic TV, at our website, motivationlocal.com, on our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer is Turner Sadlemyer. Our theme music was composed by Medicine Hat musical artist Snakes and the Riot. As always, thanks for watching or listening to our podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel or to leave us some feedback.